Hi, it's Katrina. Jordan-led Codices. It is possible that a discovery has been found that may rival that of the Dead Sea Scrolls. 70 books or codices, reportedly made of impure lead pages, were allegedly found in a cave less than 100 miles where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. This incredible collection is now in the hands of a Bedouin farmer and trucker named Hassan Saeda, who says that he inherited the treasure from his great-grandfather. These books were reportedly found in small niches carved into the cave walls near the hot springs of Hamad Gader, a religious site for thousands of years. These books date back around 2,000 years, and unlike the Dead Sea Scrolls written on papyrus or parchment, these are in book or codex form, which began with the rise of Christianity. Now known as the Jordan Codices, they have 8 or 9 pages each, and some have yet to be opened. One of the most remarkable has a cover embossed with a face, which many interpret to be a bearded young man with a crown of thorns, making it possibly the first portrait ever of Jesus Christ, maybe even done by people who knew him. For the books that have been opened, many of the pages show pictures rather than text. There is a small amount of script, but so far no one has been able to interpret it. Several Dead Sea Scrolls mention a metal book, a very holy object with the portrait of the Holy One on its cover. The biblical book of Revelations mentions sealed books with sacred information. However, these books have now been under scrutiny as to whether or not they are authentic. Many researchers, including from the Israel Antiquities Authority, the Jordanian Archaeological Department, and experts involved in a 2012 BBC investigation, have written off the codices as fake. However, Hassan Saeda and other researchers fully believe that they are authentic. In 2016, several tests done in independent laboratories confirmed that the lead the artifacts are made from can be traced back to the Romans. But was the lead reused by cunning forgers, or is it real? Several professors say that they are modern fakes. The controversial elements are the inscriptions that still haven't been translated. Saeda has allowed many independent laboratories to analyze some of the codices, and they say that they have been able to interpret parts of it, and that everything points to them being created by an early Messianic Jewish sect closely allied with the Christian Church, and that these books contained sacred information that was not meant to be opened. These scholars and lab analysts claim that there is a campaign to suppress these artifacts, but that it is important to continue to study them. Tomb of the Silver Hands. In the 18th century, archaeologists found numerous fascinating discoveries in and around the ancient tombs of Volci in Italy, which are located roughly 75 miles northwest of Rome. Included among the discoveries are some Etruscan burials dating back between the 7th and 4th centuries BC. These burials were once popular tourist attractions, but declined in popularity during the mid-19th century and were closed up. In recent years, archaeologists attempted to relocate them and failed. But during the process, they made some dazzling discoveries in their own right, including 2 large funerary complexes and over 20 small burials and tombs. The Tomb of the Silver Hands is arguably the most fascinating of all the newer finds. Discovered in 2012 by a team led by archaeologist Carlo Cassi, it consists of 3 separate chambers that were likely the burials of a noble Etruscan family. While one of the chambers was emptied by looters at some point, the others contained an impressive array of artifacts, including shiny black pottery possibly dating as far back as the 7th century BC, bronze horse harnesses and chariot remains, and 2 remarkably preserved silver hands with gold traces on the fingers and fingernails. The hands were once part of a spiralaton, which Cassie described as a kind of wooden funerary dummy that represented the dead and guarded his or her soul after the body had been cremated. While these statues often represented warriors or noblemen, Cassie believes that this one was of a woman, quite possibly reflecting an unusually elevated status that the Etruscans may have afforded to high-ranking women in the ancient world. The Giants' Graves. Throughout modern-day Sardinia are a series of megalithic tombs known as the Giants' Graves, or the Giants' Tombs. Built by the Bronze Age Nuragic civilization, they date back to around 1800 BC. There are around 800 altogether, and they were constructed in various styles, including in the shape of a bull's head and featuring depictions of male sex organs. The Nuragic culture was very religious, leading many researchers to believe that the society was theocratic, in other words, that it was led by priests or other religious authorities, and perhaps consisted of various cults dedicated to different deities. A single Nuragic group inhabited Sardinia during the first millennium BC, followed by a number of groups that emerged before or during Roman times, and which competed for control over land and resources. It's rare for archaeologists to find signs of settlements near the giants' graves, but it appears as though the sites were used for religious and ritualistic purposes. Some experts also believe that the graves were built to delineate territorial boundaries between tribes or for cosmological reasons. Whatever the case, these types of graves appear to have fallen out of practice by 1150 BC. Medieval Horde. Recently, an archaeologist trying to learn more about a large coin hoard discovered in Poland in 1935 discovered another one. Adam Kadzierski was interviewing locals to try to document the location of the original hoard for a book. He was chatting with the local priest and a farmer who told him a local rumor about another treasure collection being buried somewhere nearby. With the help of a metal detector, the archaeologist located the suspected site of the buried hoard in a cornfield. Once he and his helpers realized that they'd stumbled upon an extremely valuable cache, they called in local firefighters to guard the site until the excavation was complete. Inside a ceramic vessel was a medieval hoard brimming with silver ingots, gold rings, and thousands of silver coins. One gold ring contains the unique Cyrillic inscription, "Lord, may you help your servant Maria." This ring most likely belonged to royalty, perhaps a princess. Meanwhile, most of the coins are silver denarii that were minted during the late 11th or early 12th century, bearing an image of a large cross. The collection also consists of German, Czech, Danish, and Hungarian coins. Medieval gold jewelry is extremely rare in Poland. The items may have been passed down to a duke by his grandmother, daughter of Vladimir the Great. Researchers suspect that this and the past hoard's discovery show that the village is more historically important than they previously realized. Their next step is to analyze and date the items, which will tell more about their significance and who they likely belong to. Ancient goddess statue. While plowing a field on his family farm in Mexico City with plans to plant watermelons, a man named Cesar Cabrera noticed a mysterious limestone object poking up through the soil. With the help of some friends, he eventually unearthed the item, which turned out to be a life-size statue of a woman, which may represent the Huastec goddess of lust. The sculpture is adorned with a large headdress and other ornate embellishments. Experts believe it is at least 500 years old, and they agree with Cabrera's assessment that it is of Huastec origins, although they believe that the woman may represent a queen or another elite female. The Huastec civilization is one of the lesser-known ancient cultures that once lived in parts of modern-day Mexico. Between looting and a lack of research, this society remains enigmatic even in the eyes of experienced scholars. But the Huastec thrived for centuries, particularly along the country's southeastern coast, despite their scarce presence among today's historical knowledge. They were absorbed into the Aztec civilization long before Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés and other Europeans arrived, starting in the early 16th century. Historians believe that Huastecs were depicted as barbarians and drunkards because their conquerors wanted to justify subduing them. But their artifacts tell a different story, including one of a culture that celebrated powerful women, making the statue Cabrera discovered especially valuable. Royal dye. Israeli archaeologists recently made a groundbreaking discovery at a site called Slaves Hill in Timnah, roughly 137 miles south of Jerusalem. A cloth fragment bearing evidence of a purple dye possibly dating back to the reign of the biblical King David. The pigment is reportedly more valuable than gold, and the discovery marks the first time the color has been found on textile from that particular period in the region. In antiquity, purple attire was associated with the nobility, with priests, and of course with royalty, Israel Antiquities Authority expert Dr. Nama Sukenik told the BBC. Adding, the gorgeous shade of the purple, the fact that it does not fade, and the difficulty in producing the dye, which is found in minute quantities in the body of mollusks, all made it the most highly valued of the dyes, which often cost more than gold. Both the Jewish and Christian Bibles mention purple, including as the shade used in garments worn by Jesus, King David, and King Solomon. The color immediately attracted our attention, but we found it hard to believe that we had found true purple from such an ancient period, said Professor Erez Ben Yosef from the Archaeology Department at Tel Aviv University. This is the first time the dye was found on fabric, which dates back to roughly 1000 BC, around the time when King David ruled. Early mosque. The remnants of an early mosque were just discovered in Israel, according to archaeologists from the University of Jerusalem, who say that it may date back to the earliest decades of Islam. It was found in the northern city of Tiberias, just south of the Sea of Galilee. The mosque was likely constructed around 670 AD, about a decade after the Prophet Muhammad's death. It's of particular importance to archaeologists who know of several remaining mosques from that time period, but can't examine them because they are still in use today. The discovery affords experts the rare opportunity to study the beginnings of Islamic architecture and, according to Katja Citrin-Silverman, reflects an early tolerance among Islamic leaders for other faiths. Tiberias had already been a Muslim city for several decades at the time the mosque was built, and was also a centuries-long center for Jewish learning and life. It was also home to several Christian sites along the shoreline prior to its conquest by Muslim armies in 635 AD. The city saw considerable growth under Islamic rule, yet little was known about this until relatively recently. Excavations in Tiberias have seen an uptick in recent decades, resulting in increased discoveries throughout the ancient metropolis, including a Byzantine church and a Roman theater overlooking the sea. IAA archaeologist Gideon Avni explained in an AP interview that the recently discovered mosque helps to shed light on when it became standard protocol for Muslim builders to ensure that their houses of worship face Mecca. Experts originally believed, based on past excavations, that it may have been used as a Byzantine marketplace and later converted into a mosque, but they are now rethinking that idea. But after taking a closer look, it appears as though the mosque was built and used as one throughout its entire existence. The building's dimensions and other features closely match other mosques from the period, indicating that it was constructed solely for worship. Archaeologists also noticed that Muslims conquered cities in the Levant and Mesopotamia gradually rather than suddenly. They noted that the mosque they discovered likely stood alongside a Byzantine church and local synagogues, demonstrating the religious tolerance archaeologists mentioned. Rare French portrait. Last year, an English auction house sold a miniature portrait that it mistakenly thought was of Sir Walter Raleigh, the English adventurer and explorer. But the observant art dealer who purchased it last year, Philip Mould, realized that this assessment was wrong, and that the portrait is actually a rare depiction of Henry III of France, a controversial French king who was known for cross-dressing. Historians have long debated if Henry III was actually a transvestite and possibly a homosexual, or if it was a rumor spread by his enemies. It was often even said during his lifetime that he liked to dress in women's clothing. He hated stereotypical manly things of the day like hunting and war, and that most of his male court favorites wore their hair long and curled with bonnets like women. However, the political climate of the day was extremely dangerous, and there were many violent wars of religion. He was ultimately murdered and later on was almost lost to history after the French Revolution. Philip Mould purchased the item without ever seeing it, probably for a fraction of its true value, and hopes to cash in by selling it to the Louvre. He quickly identified the man in the portrait, and when he had an expert examine it, he learned that the signature of French court painter Jean de Court and the year 1578 were written on the reverse side, proving its authenticity. In an interview with the press, Mould called the artwork a French national treasure and said that he felt it was fitting to offer the Louvre the first right of refusal on the piece, since it was likely created in the once royal residence that the museum is housed in today. Pre-Columbian settlements. Until relatively recently, scientists mistakenly believed that the Amazon rainforest was a paradise that remained mostly untouched by humans. But archaeologists are increasingly disproving this widespread misconception, including with the 2018 discovery of 81 pre-Columbian settlements in the Amazon's Tapajos Basin, a region previously thought to be historically largely uninhabited. The sites, which were identified through satellite imagery, ranged in size from just 100 feet wide to 47 acres. These findings show that the area was not only inhabited, but that millions of people probably lived there. Like numerous other discoveries of ancient settlements throughout the Amazon jungle, the villages are helping experts understand what the region was like before Europeans arrived. The idea that the Amazon was a pristine forest, untouched by humans, home to scattered nomadic populations, we already knew that was not true, said lead study author Dr. Jonas Gregorio de Sousa. The big debate is how populations were distributed in pre-Columbian times in the Amazon. First identical twins. An Upper Paleolithic burial site in modern-day Austria contains the oldest known remains of identical human twins. Dating back roughly 31,000 years, the Stone Age grave was discovered in 2005 at the Krems-Wartburg Archaeological Site, which sits along the banks of the Danube River. It contains the skeletons of an infant who died shortly after childbirth and their sibling, who survived for around 7 weeks before passing away. Over the years, this site has revealed over 2,300 stone artifacts and many mammoth remains, including heads and teeth. However, the recent discovery of twins found underneath a mammoth shoulder blade has made major headlines. Their remains were covered with red ochre pigment, and the double burial contained 53 mammoth ivory beads, which were once probably a necklace, as well as a fox tooth and 3 mollusks, which were probably necklace pendants. The mammoth shoulder blade was placed on top of them, probably as part of a ritual. DNA analysis confirmed that the 2 siblings buried together are identical twins. These twins predate the twin girls found in Spain, dating back to the 4th century BC, and provide answers to some important developmental and evolutionary questions. DNA also proved that an infant buried nearby was most likely the twins' cousin, who died at just 3 months old. The child was buried in an adjacent plot just 5 feet away and was covered in red ochre and accompanied by grave goods, including a 3-inch-long mammoth ivory pin. It is the first time researchers have used ancient DNA to confirm twins in the archaeological record. The archaeologists working on this said that finding multiple burials from the Paleolithic period is already rare, but the fact that there was enough high-quality DNA still available to analyze was like winning the lottery. Squatting skeleton. In May of last year, archaeologists were performing a routine excavation prior to wind turbine construction in the German state of Brandenburg. Here they were surprised to discover a strange squatting skeleton belonging to a woman who died over 4,000 years ago. The pit was found near an ancient settlement area. She was found lying on her right side with her head pointing eastward, according to Dr. Christoph Krauskopf of the Brandenburg Authorities for Heritage Management and Archaeological State Museum. This type of grave is known as a contracted burial in the archaeological world. This crouching or squatting position is one of the oldest forms of positioning a body and typical of burials in Neolithic Europe. However, Krauskopf says that the burial is quite strange because the pit is much larger than what was needed for the woman's remains, and there are no grave goods that might help indicate her status or cause of death. However, someone had taken the time to border the area with field stones. Experts estimated that the burial dates back to sometime between 2500 and 2200 BC during the final phase of the Neolithic period. The bones and teeth will undergo radiocarbon dating, genetic testing, and isotope analysis, which will hopefully reveal the skeleton's age and the environment she lived in. Skeleton Lake. Located at Rupkund Lake deep within the Himalayas, a site dubbed Skeleton Lake has perplexed experts since its discovery in 1942 by a British guide. Here, at 16,499 feet above sea level, lie hundreds of human skeletons. At first, people thought it was the remains of soldiers who had died crossing the Himalayas during the war, but they seemed like they had been there much longer than that. It looked more like the people here had died due to some catastrophic event, perhaps an epidemic or a storm. But what really happened has been a long-standing mystery. An international team of researchers published a recent study which analyzed the bone's DNA. It was tough work, seeing as the site is often visited by pilgrims and hikers who move the skeletons and remove artifacts. There are also rock slides and other natural events that have damaged things over the years. Local legend says that a king and queen along with their court were making a pilgrimage to the shrine of a mountain goddess, but they were acting disrespectfully, getting drunk and celebrating a bit too much, so they were struck down by the goddess. To solve the mystery, the scientists sequenced the genomes of 38 of the skeletons and were surprised to learn that while 23 were of South Asian ancestry and 1 was of Southeast Asian ancestry, 14 were from the Eastern Mediterranean. These people were not all one group that had died all at the same time, but were actually several groups of people over many years. The Asian remains trace back to around 800 BC and the others to 1800 BC. This finding directly challenges the long-held theory that everyone at Rupkund Lake died in a single catastrophic event. Rupkund Lake attracted visitors from far-flung places, but they were unable to determine what brought people there or how they died. One thing is clear, the site's history is far more complex than scientists originally imagined, and they are hoping they can continue to find answers to the mysterious site. A medieval female criminal. In 2017, archaeologists working in southern Bulgaria discovered a late medieval grave containing a woman who was buried face down with her hands tied behind her back. Found in a necropolis on the Nebet Tepe hill in the modern-day city of Plovdiv, the odd burial could have belonged to a bandit or some other sort of criminal, whose strange position was likely a punishment for an alleged wrongdoing she committed while she was alive. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to restore that funeral's history completely because there are also pits from the Ottoman period there, explained excavation leader and archaeologist Sofia Hristeva, who added that it was the first time she had found someone buried in such a manner. The site itself dates back to the 13th and/or 14th centuries during the Second Bulgarian Empire. Also in 2017, archaeologists discovered an equally strange skeleton with an arrow through its chest at the nearby site of Antiquity Odeon, which the ancient Greeks and Romans once used for theatrical performances before it was repurposed as a medieval cemetery. Dating back to the 11th or 12th century, the grave left experts with numerous unanswered questions, including whether the arrow killed the deceased individual or if it was left there as a gift for a warrior. Baby buried in a jar. Late last year, archaeologists in Jaffa, Israel, discovered the skeleton of a human baby inside a 3,800-year-old jar. Archaeologists from the Israel Antiquities Authority unearthed the poorly preserved remains from a shallow pit roughly 10 feet below sea level while performing routine excavations of a 4,000-year-old city ahead of a construction project. Jar burials are fairly common, dating as far back as 4,500 BC and up to the 20th century. Different civilizations customized the practice according to their beliefs. Despite the practice's long history, scholars are unsure what its purpose was. It was once customary only to bury adults in jars, but at some point people began burying babies and children in them. IAA archaeologist Yoav Arbel speculated that perhaps ancient people were compelled to protect their dead from the environment, or the jar was meant to be symbolic, representing the return to the womb. Perhaps both. Scientists are hoping that excavations at this site and others will help us understand more about the rituals and context of these jar burials. Skeleton. During the summer of 2015, scientists at the Penn Museum in Philadelphia rediscovered a 6,500-year-old human skeleton that had sat in a coffin-like box in a storage room for 85 years. There was no documentation of its identity, leaving the skeleton's origins and life story a mystery. Further examination and a project focused on digitizing records from a past archaeological excavation helped to shed some light on the skeleton in storage. As it turns out, the bones belonged to a muscular male who stood between 5.7 and 5.8 feet tall. He died at age 50 or older and was buried at the site of in what is now southern Iraq. Ubaid period skeletons dating back between 5,500 BC and 4,000 BC are extremely rare. A team led by Sir Leonard Woolley unearthed the remains between 1929 and 1930 while excavating a Mesopotamian royal cemetery at the site. This particular skeleton predates the other remains by roughly 2,000 years. During ancient times, was a small island surrounded by a marsh, according to Woolley's findings. At some point, a great flood supposedly gushed in without notice. Based on where they were buried, it's believed that the skeleton lived around this time. Shortly after news broke of the rediscovery, experts expressed their hopes to learn more about the individual and the society they lived in, including their diet and ancestral origins, by analyzing the skeleton using modern techniques. Bizarre burials. Swiss anthropologist Amélie Altarage was perplexed when someone found a middle-aged man buried face down at a 400-year-old cemetery in Bern. He was laid to rest with an iron knife and a purse full of coins dating back between 1630 and 1650 AD in the crook of his arm. Altarage wrote in a research paper that she suspected the man was buried face down to prevent him from returning from the grave. She worked with a team of researchers to analyze nearly 100 face-down burials that took place over a 900-year period throughout Switzerland. Most dated back to tumultuous times when plagues ravaged the region and the burials revealed signs of mutilation or weighing bodies down with stones. Experts believe that these methods were designed to thwart vampires and the undead by preventing them from escaping their graves. As the plague swept across Europe starting in 1347 AD, burial practices shifted noticeably, demonstrating a widespread belief that the dead could return to haunt the living. The deadly disease killed people by the millions, and it claimed lives faster than communities could keep up with. Consequently, people dealt with the unpleasant reality of decaying corpses, which bloat and shift, making disturbing sounds that may make them seem like zombies or some other type of creature that may return to life. The belief that people were cursed from beyond the grave spread as individuals became ill and died within days of a relative's funeral. But not all researchers believe that face-down burials stemmed from a fear of the undead. Speaking with National Geographic, archaeologist Peter Parvanov explained that people may have been laid to rest in this position in a desperate attempt to prevent disease spread or to represent sin, based on the belief that God was punishing a community for their wrongdoings through disease. SixHeaded Chief. In the 14th century, a warrior in his 40s died and was buried in Scotland's Easter Ross region, in what is now the fishing village of Port Mahomet. He was laid to rest in a ceremonial fashion with an array of other human remains surrounding his head. Someone discovered the burial in 1997, and the deceased man was soon nicknamed the Six-Headed Clan Chief, due to the confusing mix of human bones that were found with him. Originally, scientists believed that the medieval grave contained the remains of a single man surrounded by 5 skulls. Last year, DNA analysis results revealed that the burial was occupied by 2 men and surrounded by 4 skulls. Still creepy and mysterious. Why did they do this? The men were either cousins or a nephew and uncle and were buried between the late 13th and early 15th centuries. 3 of the 4 skulls belonged to relatives of the second man. The 4th skull dated back between the 8th and 10th centuries and was originally buried in a nearby monastic cemetery, leading researchers to believe that it belonged to a Pictish monk. They think that the skull was a prized family heirloom. But at that time, the practice of placing disembodied skulls into a grave with a body was practically unheard of in Scotland, according to the site's lead archaeologist Cecily Spall, who spoke with Live Science. You can find examples in the Neolithic and the Bronze Age where body parts were used for worship, but this is something completely different, she explained. In the medieval period, harvesting the graves of your parents and grandparents for body parts and putting them into a contemporary burial is about as unusual as it gets. Evidence shows that the grave's original occupant died from extreme violence, most likely a fatal blow to the face. He was a man of high importance, perhaps a local leader, based on the location of his burial in the middle of a parish. The second man's relatives likely put him there to emphasize their connections with the first man, perhaps during a time of turmoil when it would prove beneficial in legitimizing their community leadership. Casket on the shore. While walking along the shore at Bridge of Dawn near Aberdeen, Scotland in early 2019, a family spotted an eroding casket containing a woman's skeletal remains. Authorities summoned experts to the scene, where they determined that the woman was deliberately buried at the site, but not recently, probably sometime between the 17th and early 19th centuries. Aberdeenshire Council archaeologist Bruce Mann explained that the team originally thought the individual was a shipwreck victim, but they were surprised to learn that she was female. There is definitely a story there, but we may never know why she was buried here, he said. The team found no settlements and no other graves near the burial site. As far as they know, the burial is isolated. Once the investigation is finished, the woman will be reburied at a cemetery in Aberdeen. Strange Viking Duo. In late 2019, archaeologists dug up 2 Viking corpses buried with their longboats, one on top of the other, in central Norway. The pair died nearly a year apart, with the first burial, a man, dating back to the 8th century, and the second burial, a woman, dating back to the 9th century. This was likely done on purpose, according to scientists who believe that Vikings probably exhumed the man and his 33-foot-long longboat and placed the woman and her smaller longboat inside. I had heard about several boat graves being buried in one burial mound, but never about a boat that had been buried in another boat, said lead archaeologist Raymond Salvage. He learned, following the discovery, that several similar graves were found during the 1950s in southern Norway, but he said this is essentially an unknown phenomenon. Grave goods show that the 9th century woman who was buried in a 26-foot-long ship was an important person. She wore a pearl necklace and fine clothes and was laid to rest next to a cow's head. The most perplexing item in her grave was a cross-shaped brooch made in Ireland, leading researchers to believe that she was involved in Viking raids. Most of both boats' wood and human remains had rotted away, but scientists hope to learn more about the woman by analyzing her skull fragments and hopefully extracting DNA. Rubber ducks. Nong Aom, a pet parent who lives in Pattaya, Thailand, rushed her 2-year-old American bulldog named Devil into emergency care after he started retching. Nong noticed that most of the rubber ducks she had recently purchased as decorations were missing and developed the sneaking suspicion that Devil had eaten them. Before they walked out the door, the dog coughed up a chewed rubber duck and vomited 5 more. That'll do it. An X-ray showed that Devil had devoured 32 rubber ducks, and staff immediately performed emergency surgery. For more than an hour, they removed the rubber ducks from the canine's stomach one by one. Devil woke up from anesthesia feeling back to his old self, and excitedly ventured out into the waiting room to reunite with his guardian. "Normally, my dog will not eat everything. He knows what's edible and what's not," Nong Aum told the Daily Mail, adding, "It's very lucky I found him, and I live so close to the vets, where he might not have survived." Well, with a name like Devil, he's bound to get into some trouble. The vet who removed the ducks from Devil's stomach is no stranger to taking rubber toys out of animals' stomachs, but this was the first time she removed so many of them. "It was unbelievable," she said, pointing out that rubber toys can be very dangerous to dogs, and that pet parents must remember to keep a close eye on their canine companions to make sure they don't eat them. A belly full of rocks. In 2014, a Plano, Texas resident noticed his pet frog Kermit eating the ornamental rocks that lined the bottom of his cage. The concerned pet parent's suspicions proved true when he took Kermit to the vet and an X-ray revealed that the amphibian's stomach was chock full of rocks. Veterinarians surgically removed the stones from Kermit's stomach and he fully recovered. Meanwhile, his owner removed the remaining rocks from his habitat. Paws and Claws Animal Hospital, where Kermit received treatment, won first prize in the 2014 They Ate What? Contest, an annual competition that invites veterinarians from around the United States to submit X-rays of the strangest things they found inside animals. And believe me, there's a lot, but the rocks must have impressed them. An entire deer. Alabama resident Mandy Stokes nabbed the world record for the largest alligator ever hunted in 2014 when she shot and killed a 15.75-foot, 1,011.5-pound gator with her family's help. Taxidermist Ken Owens was tasked with preparing the reptile's carcass for display. He was incredibly surprised when he cut into the massive alligator and found a fully intact 3-year-old doe that the animal had eaten whole. "I always thought that once an alligator killed something, that it ate a piece at a time," Owens told AL.com, adding, "I can't imagine how it got a hold of that adult deer and ate it in one piece like that. It's unbelievable." Mature does can weigh as much as 100 pounds in Alabama, making the discovery shocking indeed. Moreover, deer are not a typical component of an alligator's diet, even though past studies have indicated that larger specimens are perfectly capable of doing so. Usually, alligators feed on smaller mammals, such as raccoons and muskrats, and they also eat fruits and vegetables. In addition to discovering the deer's remains, Owens found greenery, squirrels, bird bones, and evidence that the gator may even have eaten a cow. A Barbie banana. A woman in Missouri noticed that her granddaughter's bearded dragon, named Dragon, wasn't eating. So she took him to local veterinarian Andrew Rambo at the Gladstone Animal Clinic. Rambo couldn't figure out with the naked eye what was wrong with the friendly reptile, so he recommended an X-ray, which seemed like an extreme measure to the grandmother at first. X-rays are expensive. But knowing how much her granddaughter loved Dragon, she agreed to the procedure. The X-ray revealed a banana-shaped item inside Dragon's body, which had veterinary staff very confused. They tried figuring out what it was and wondered if he had swallowed a candy banana. Rambo surgically removed the object, which was smaller than a nickel and looked very much like a tiny banana, but was definitely not a piece of candy. "That's where Barbie's banana went," the client's granddaughter said. As it turns out, Dragon ventured into her Barbie playhouse fairly regularly. At some point, he decided to munch on the fake food. Rambo pointed out that the situation could have been worse, stating it could have been Barbie's shoe. The reptile was saved, and Dragon continued to enjoy his playhouse with fewer small objects in sight. Shishkebab. Marley, a German short-haired pointer, is one of those dogs who never fully outgrows their mischievous puppy phase. Marley went to the vet pretty often for eating weird stuff. "I quit encouraging his owner that he would grow out of it when he recently turned 6, Gulf Breeze, Florida-based veterinarian Tim Gossman, who treated the dog, wrote in his 2014 They Ate What? Contest entry. One day, Marley's guardian discovered that the 2 shish kebab skewers she'd made for dinner were missing. She found him under her bed with one skewer on the floor and the other nowhere to be seen. Assuming the sneaky canine had eaten the vanished skewer, Marley's owner took him to the vet. Even Dr. Gossman, who was used to Marley's antics by then, didn't think it was possible that he had eaten an entire shish kebab skewer. Lo and behold, an X-ray revealed this to be the case. The skewer was safely removed from the dog's stomach, and as Gossman put it, Marley was soon out the door and on to his next adventure. One dog, a 1-year-old Siberian husky named Jax, was less fortunate than Marley when he swallowed a 6-inch wooden kebab skewer at his family's Minnesota home in 2010. Jack's owners were surprised that he had managed to eat the skewer, but they mistakenly assumed that it would uneventfully pass through his digestive system and out the other end. A few days later, Jack's pained cries prompted his guardians to take him to the vet. But nothing alarming appeared on an X-ray, and the vet sent Jax home, assuming the dog was simply sick and dehydrated. When the dog's agonizing screams continued, his family knew something was seriously wrong. They took him to 2 more vets, each of whom performed an X-ray and found nothing visibly wrong with Jax. Remember, the shishkebab this time was made of wood. Finally, a vet decided to do exploratory surgery, and it's a good thing he did. The shishkebab skewer had pierced the canine's large intestine, and he was lucky that it did not cause more serious damage or cause the organ to leak fluid. Jax was eating just 2 hours after surgery, and his grateful owners vowed to never leave shish kebab skewers within his reach ever again. A human finger. In mid-2012, Idaho resident Hans Galassi lost 4 fingers in a freak wakeboarding accident on a remote lake in the northern part of the state. He spent the next few months in physical therapy and rehabilitation, learning how to live without the fingers. Then, in September of that year, fishermen Calvin Nolan and Mark Blackstone caught some trout. When they cut one open, they were pretty shocked to find a human finger inside. The quick-thinking angler put the appendage in a freezer and contacted the Bonner County Sheriff's Department. Detectives fingerprinted it and traced it back to Galassi. The lake is cold and deep, so it was in remarkably good shape, Detective Gary Johnston told CNN. Johnston called Galassi and offered his finger back to him, and the man politely declined at first. The sheriff's office stored it in a freezer in case Galassi had a change of heart, and as it turns out, he did have some second thoughts and called his doctor to see if the finger could be reattached. It's unclear what the outcome of Galassi's inquiry was, but he approached the discovery with humor either way, stating, "I had joked with friends previously that my fingers were fish food now, and so it just played in line with what I was expecting." You may be surprised to learn that this wasn't the first time someone found a human finger inside of a fish. In 1991, a man named Robert Lindsay dove into the water at the Flaming Gorge Reservoir in Wyoming to try saving his friend's young daughter who had fallen in. Instead, a boat propeller chopped off 3 of his fingers, and while 2 were recovered and reattached, Lindsay's thumb remained missing. A fisherman found the thumb over 6 months later while fishing in the Green River nearby, and the local coroner traced it back to Lindsay, who jokingly told the media, "I'll probably just put it on a shelf to show people. I'll probably keep it in a jar." These people have a really good sense of humor. A live bomb. While gutting a 3-foot-long squid for a customer at his fish market in Guangdong, China in early 2013, a man known only as Mr. Huang discovered a live bomb in the animal's stomach. He immediately called the police and reported the 8-inch explosive. Officers took the bomb away and detonated it in a controlled explosion. Authorities did not disclose the bomb's age or origin, but speculated that it may have been dropped from a fighter plane and washed into the squid's habitat, where the creatures normally feed on small fish and prawns. Perhaps he thought the bomb was his favorite food and gulped it down, Mr. Huang speculated in an interview with the Guangzhou Daily newspaper, adding he certainly had a big belly when he was caught. Officials used the incident as an opportunity to remind people to call the police if they discover anything inside of a fish that might be an unexploded bomb, because, well, you never know, it could happen again. Live turtles. The YouTube channel Wilderness Life is dedicated to making videos about surviving in nature, with a special focus on primitive cooking. They have a warning that they have graphic videos that might be upsetting to some people because they are all about hunting and cooking animals that they find and hunt in the forest. In September 2019, the channel uploaded a video showing 2 young men hunting a small crocodile in the jungle. One of them pinned the reptile to the ground with a large stick, while the other stepped on the animal's head and tied its snout shut. The footage shows the pair cutting the crocodile open to get it ready to eat and discovering 3 live turtles in its stomach. The question is whether these turtles were really found alive in there, and if so, how long they can last inside a croc's stomach without dying. They remove the turtles before the video shifts to the next scene, which shows the men cooking various parts of the crocodile over an open fire. The problem is that they don't actually show the turtles coming out, so many people in the comments said that the guys shifted the camera away momentarily and then inserted the turtles into the partially butchered animal to make it look as if the crocodile had eaten them. While it's unknown what actually happened, the video has nonetheless captured people's attention, garnering nearly 52 million views since it was first posted. A badge. Fisherman Arnold Constantino made the catch of his life one morning in April 2017 when he netted an enormous grouper fish off the Philippine coast. Measuring 7 feet long and weighing over 441 pounds, it's likely the largest such fish ever caught in the region. It was certainly the largest grouper Constantino ever caught, as his catches typically weighed no more than 220 pounds. Eager to cash in on the gargantuan fish, Constantino immediately hauled it to a local fish market, where workers sliced it open to check it for sale. While doing so, they found a gold security guard's badge inside the fish's stomach. Some locals erupted into a panic, assuming that the grouper had eaten a human, while others simply figured that it had swallowed the badge, perhaps mistaking it as food. Nobody knows why there was a badge inside, Constantino said. It caused some panic. Did it attack somebody or swallow someone missing at sea? We are not sure. Unfortunately, the fear that the fish had victimized a person devalued the creature, Constantino said, stating, "Selling the fish was harder when traders thought it might have eaten a human. I had to take a lower price." Beach towel. Monty the python, get it, was hanging out with his family in the yard when they noticed that he was acting strangely. Daniel from Australia had had Monty for over 16 years, and he looked bigger than usual. Quickly, the family noticed that a towel which was laid on the ground wasn't there anymore. The snake had somehow managed to swallow an entire beach towel. Monty was quickly taken to the animal hospital for treatment. It was a good thing the snake's family acted so quickly, as without the procedure that removed the beach towel, Monty surely would have died. After an endoscope was placed inside the snake's gastrointestinal tract, the doctors were able to safely remove the towel by yanking it out bit by bit like some creepy magician's endless scarf trick. The procedure was successful and Monty was reunited with his family. Hopefully he won't be eating anything else he's not supposed to. Iron Age true crime story. Archaeologists digging in preparation for construction of the scheduled UK Railway High Speed 2 was put to a minor halt when they uncovered a skeleton who appeared to be an ancient murder victim. No one is really sure what happened to this man, but it definitely seemed like he was the unfortunate victim of someone's heinous crime. When they dated his remains, they discovered that whatever happened occurred somewhere around 2,500 years ago during the Iron Age. Given the positioning of his skeleton, archaeologists suspect that his hands might have been bound prior to his death. The skeleton's hands were close together and locked underneath his pelvic bone, so they could have been wrapped to stay there. If this is correct, then this poor person may have been the result of an execution. He was also placed facing directly into the ground, meaning that whoever left him there didn't care very much about him. Now researchers are hard at work to find evidence of what really happened. At the site of his remains, archaeologists also uncovered some tiny pieces of pottery. Maybe these could be some sort of clue? They are also going to look at the skull to seek out evidence of blunt force trauma or for indications of stab wounds. But until they look closer into the matter, the jury is still out concerning this ancient true crime story. The oldest beheading in the Americas. Researchers found the ancient remains of a young man they believe to be the first person in the Americas to be beheaded. He was found at the shelter site of Lapa do Santo in Brazil, and according to a new scientific study published in PLOS, he lost his head about 9,100 to 9,400 years ago. One of the members on the research team was able to determine that the man had been decapitated with his hands laying over each side of his face and fingers in an unusual position. This led the team to believe this had to be one of the earliest known examples of a ritual murder. The process of extracting the body parts from the victim seemed straight out of a Frankenstein movie. It seems that the man's head wasn't removed in one swipe. Instead, there is evidence of multiple blows from a sharp instrument, and since the skull was twisted and gnarled in places, it suggests that it wasn't an easy task getting it off the body. There were also cuts on the bones, implying the man's flesh had been removed prior to being buried, meaning decapitation probably wasn't the main cause of death. Chemical analysis of the man's teeth revealed that he had been a local to the area. Put that together with the other evidence, and researchers purported that the ritualistic behavior likely had something to do with how the community wanted to honor their dead and pay respects to their ancestors. Unfortunately, that's all we currently know about this ancient man and his life, but more may be to come. Hybrid monsters. According to a recent report from the Daily Mail, archaeologists unearthed several hybrid animal remains from an extremely bizarre site that is now being called Duropolis, found near Dorset in the United Kingdom. The bodies of these strange hybrid beasts are shedding some much-needed light on the religious practices and beliefs of the ancient Celtic civilization. The remains were created about 2,000 years ago and buried inside pits underneath the houses of the Celts. Archaeologists were pretty surprised when they started finding buried animals that didn't exist. They were mysteriously put together using limbs and heads from various animals. For example, one such hybrid monster was a sheep with an extra head. Another was a cow with a horse's head. The co-director of the dig, a man named Miles Russell, said that placing these strange animal remains inside of pits was a kind of thank you note from the Celts, a way to show their appreciation for the animals that helped them live. So far, there have been about 122 of these peculiar animal burials found by archaeologists from the University of Bournemouth. The Chamber of Secrets. The Great Pyramid of Giza is an outstanding archaeological site, but its insides are a bit scarier than many people realize. For example, a robot has recently sent back the first images of a small and very secret chamber inside the heart of the Great Pyramid, which has not been seen by human eyes in at least 4,500 years. But believe it or not, this robot revealed a deeper and spookier mystery. It showed a door inside of the tiny chamber that could lead to yet another secret room, and scientists have no idea what kinds of ancient horrors are awaiting them within. But don't panic. According to Kate Spence, a knowledgeable Egyptologist from the University of Cambridge, the mysterious doorway is probably the end of the shaft with absolutely nothing behind it. However, this is not known for sure. The door could be symbolic. It could be a secret entranceway to a hidden chamber containing the true mystery of the pyramid, or it could be a storage closet with a few ancient brooms in it. Some conspiracy theorists even claim that behind this door at the very heart of the pyramid lies an entombed alien mummy. What do you think is behind this tiny door? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. Wreckage of a U.S. slave ship. Researchers have recently discovered the wreckage of the very last official slave ship from the United States at the bottom of the Mobile River in Alabama. The ship was called Clotilda, and this revelation is extremely significant for several reasons. One of which is that the Clotilda is one of the most well-documented slavery vessels in America, with a long history of savagery and inhuman practices. The ship was actually burned and sunk on purpose to hide the evidence of its journey in procuring slaves. The mission to find the ship was funded by the Alabama Historical Commission. Excavators ended up combing through a section of the Mobile River that had never been dredged thoroughly before, and among the multiple sunken ships, they found one that historians could confidently say matched the description of the Clotilda. They were a little surprised to find that the remains of the ship were found in relatively good condition. Its last journey brought over 100 African children and young adults to Alabama just 1 year before the Civil War. The House of Bones. Archaeologists in Russia have recently made a chilling discovery. As reported by Live Science in 2020, they have found the bones of mammoths and other creatures from the Ice Age, 20,000 years ago, used in the construction of a giant structure. This is the literal House of Bones, built from the remains of foxes, bears, mammoths, wolves, and every other Ice Age creature that you can think of. There were at least 60 different woolly mammoths used in the construction of the house. According to the lead researcher on the project, a lecturer of prehistoric archaeology named Alexander Pryor, the ancient people who built the structure used every last piece of mammoth, including the smallest vertebrae and the biggest skulls. Nobody is sure what the structure was made for. It could have been a huge house of bone lived in by a prominent member of society, or it could have been a horrifying place of ritual, perhaps just a storage facility for meat. Right now, experts are still looking into the situation. What do you think the House of Bones was for? Let me know in the comments below. Shackled remains. One of the more gruesome discoveries was a mass grave of 80 skeletons found in Athens, Greece. The bones had their wrists clamped in iron shackles, and according to archaeologists, this burial site was the result of a mass execution. Some of the skeletons were in a neat row, while others were twisted up and piled on top of each other. But archaeologists aren't sure exactly who they were or why they were buried with a semblance of respect. They were initially found at the Phaleron Delta necropolis, located near the National Opera House. Head of excavations Dr. Stella Chrysolaki said that each person was executed in the same style, that all the victims were young, and each was in relatively good health. Whatever happened appeared to be somewhat violent, as most had their arms bound above their heads, with the wrists tied together. But the precise way that they had been buried suggests that these were more than slaves or common criminals. So the question here is, why were they killed? One theory is that the 80 men were from a period of great social unrest, back between the 5th and 8th centuries BC. They may have been part of a mob who wished to stage a coup in 632 BC with the help of an Olympic champion, an Athenian noble named Cyclon, and his father-in-law, a guy named the Tyrant of Megara. But clearly the coup failed, and all those who supported Cyclon and the Tyrant were killed. These 80 men could very well have been part of the coup. World War II sunken craft. In 1942, during a two-day battle at Santa Cruz Island, the USS Hornet, which had been a massive aircraft carrier complete with anti-aircraft guns and all the latest in weapons technology, was blown apart by Japanese bombs and sunk. The battle cost 11 sailors their lives, and at least 2,000 crew members were forced to abandon ship. The U.S. Navy tried to salvage some pieces of the aircraft carrier, but it proved difficult as it was smacked by 4 Japanese torpedoes. The ship was destroyed and it sank to the bottom of the ocean, where it stayed until just recently. According to ABC News, researchers have finally located the USS Hornet. They found it deep within the South Pacific Ocean, about 17,000 feet below the surface. Researchers on board the RV Petrel found the sunken ship's spooky remains using old information deck logs and action reports from both Japanese and American ships from the original battle. Those investigating the site managed to find and document the remains on their first dive, and even though it's not going to be brought up to the surface just yet, the Vice Chief of Naval Operations praised the discovery of the USS Hornet, saying that everyone can draw inspiration from the fighting spirit of such a ship. Alien skulls in Mexico. Perhaps the most otherworldly archaeological discovery made was a collection of alien skulls located at an ancient graveyard in Mexico. This graveyard was originally found by residents in the small Mexican pueblo of Navas back in 1999 while an irrigation canal was being built. Inside was a whole horde of deformed skulls that looked like they belonged to extraterrestrial creatures. Of course, scientists quickly determined that these skulls were not of an alien origin. They were human skulls deliberately modified into elongated shapes. One of the lead researchers from the Arizona State University said whoever had used the cemetery 1,000 years ago practiced cranial deformation as a way of distinguishing between social groups. The precise reason as to why people found in the cemetery had skulls like this is still unknown, but at least 25 of the burials had this type of deformation. 17 of them were children between 5 months old and 16 years old, and the archaeologists are saying that many of the youngsters likely died as a result of the cranial modification. Another odd observation was that only one of the 25 was female. Also, many of these skeletons were found wearing excessive jewelry, from nose rings to necklaces made of snails. One person was even buried with a giant turtle shell placed on their abdomen. But just like with the strange elongated skulls, archaeologists are still unsure why some people were buried with special artifacts and some were buried with none, especially since they were all found in the same place. Entire population destroyed. In the year 800 AD, a horrifying event of monstrous proportions occurred. It looks like an entire Native American population was destroyed. At Sacred Ridge, close to Durango in Colorado, about 14,800 human skeleton fragments, along with a collection of mutilated dogs and other dead animals, were found in pits. So far, it has turned into one of the largest remains of ancient bones ever collected. Based on archaeological evidence, including several axes which tested positive for traces of human blood, archaeologists are confident that the genocide happened because of a conflict between 2 different Anasazi Puebloan groups. One archaeologist with the Woods Canyon Archaeological Consultants told Discovery News that it was likely an inside job, when the residents of Sacred Ridge were wiped out from the oldest to the youngest as part of a complete social breakdown. Basically, it was a quick event that involved one community completely wiping out the other, then burying their bodies in pits. The Screaming Mummy. In 1881, a screaming mummy was discovered in Egypt. It was found at Deir el-Bahari and is believed to have once been a princess. The 3,000-year-old mummy was recently re-examined by a famous Egyptologist named Zahi Hawass. It was an attempt to find out if she was truly screaming at the time of her death, which could indicate that she was mummified while still alive. The reason she's called the Screaming Mummy is, of course, because her face is mummified in a perpetual expression of agony, with her mouth hanging open as if she screamed in fear in her final moments, like in the movies. Was she really screaming at her time of death? Researchers already knew that the Screaming Mummy was in her 60s when she died. They also knew that she was mummified in the same position she probably died in. Using these facts, Hawass inspected the mummy and made the conclusion that her head likely tilted to the side after she died, and that by the time rigor mortis set in, she was already stuck with an eternal scream on her face. This has happened to other mummies as well, since that part of the face seems to decay and the jaw will fall open unless sealed shut by an expert embalmer. While it looks quite shocking, take comfort in knowing that she most likely died a more peaceful death. Thanks for watching! Which of these scary archaeological discoveries freaked you out the most? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button for more videos like these. See you soon! Bye!